Hello and welcome to another Top Grades Made Easy video. This time I've decided to see if I can make writing a brilliant essay as simple as possible. And I think I've done it. I've got 6 things to teach you. Don't worry, we won't read them now. You'll see how I apply them to a real essay. This real essay comes to us from Lissy, a viewer who's very kindly donated it. It was a grade 8 or 9, 28 out of 30. I'm going to show you why she got such a high score and obviously how to get 30 out of 30. Let's look at a typical question which will be the same no matter what the text is you're studying. Don't worry if you're not studying A Christmas Carol, everything I show you will be 100% relevant to your texts. Starting with this extracts, explore how Dickens uses the Cratchit family. So our first big clue is the word explore, which means show me more than one interpretation, show me more than one way of looking at this, and I'll give you the top grades. Then we have this idea of Dickens using. This means that characters are always a construct, and so the examiners want you to use that word construct, so that you're showing them, you know, these aren't real people, they are invented for a purpose. And again, having the author's name there is a way to remind you to write about the author's purpose. Now again, you can prepare that in advance, can't you? Because it's not as though the author changes their purpose depending on what the GCSE question is. No, the purpose is always the same. So, how does Dickens use the Cratchit family to show the struggles of the poor? Now this is the tricky part. The examiners will only ask you how the author shows something, and that's really annoying. So yes, you're going to show exactly how Dickens illustrates, shows, portrays the struggles of the poor. But that isn't going to get you the very top grades. There is an unspoken part of the question. It's this word why. I've added it here. It's not in the actual question. This is a hidden question that is hidden in every single question. And so what you have to say to yourself is this: all right, that's what the author does. They show the struggles of the poor. But why do they do that? And that explanation of the why is where you get the really top grades. Okay. If you've watched any of my thesis videos, you'll know that you must start your argument with a thesis. It outlines what you're going to prove in the essay. So this is like a 30-second essay plan. And I tell you to have 3 things in that thesis, including the why. Now let's check out Lissy's thesis. Dickens presents the Cratchits as a relatable and morally good family to evoke sympathy from the reader and highlight the struggles of the poor. Well, although this feels as though it has 4 ideas, that the family is relatable 1, that they're morally good 2, that Dickens wants sympathy from the reader 3, and wants to highlight the struggles of the poor 4, it isn't actually, it's 2. So the relatable and morally good family is really 1 point, and the sympathy from the reader highlighting the struggles of the poor is also another point, because highlighting the struggles is what gets the sympathy. So it's only a 2-part thesis, and the bit that's missing is why does Dickens do that? What is his reason for getting sympathy from the reader? What does he want the reader to think or feel or do after finishing the novel? That's the key to the why, and the 3rd part of your thesis. Now we're going to jump into the 2nd paragraph of the essay, and I shall explain the highlighting afterwards. Dickens presents the Cratchits as a seemingly content and joyful family through the use of a semantic field of religion. Stave 3 shows the Christmas celebrations with proposals of God bless us and complaints deemed heresy. This constant use of religious imagery would resonate with a Victorian audience, many of whom were devout Christians, and as such would immediately recognise the Cratchits as a morally good family. Let's start at seemingly. This is tentative language. It means it's not a certain interpretation. And hey, guess what? That shows you are exploring. It shows that you're looking at more than one interpretation. Next, we have a semantic field of religion. Now, I'm not going to talk too much in this essay about using subject terminology, but this is clear subject terminology. And why that's useful to you is you will always be able to write about a semantic field, because all authors do this. And the semantic fields are always connected to the big ideas they're writing about. Here the big idea is religion, but feminism might be a big idea, or the rights of people of different social classes. Whatever your text is, there'll be big ideas, themes, that the semantic field reflects. So again, you can prepare this in advance. If you don't know what a semantic field is, go and look it up. In the green here, we have embedded quotations. This is a super skill. It shows the examiner that you can build your evidence into your existing sentences. So that's so cool. Your quotations fit into the sentences and your sentences still make sense. This is a super efficient way of writing. I'll highlight a video up here that teaches you how to do it. It's called Kill P, so get rid of P paragraphs. And Lissy is so good at that she's able to write this grade 8 or 9 essay in 507 words. And if I tell you that the average grade 8 essay is at least 700 words long, you'll see how useful embedded quotations are going to be. Then in grey here, I want you to notice how she uses context, not to show the examiner that she knows about the time, but to back up her point. The Victorian audience, many of whom were devout Christians, backs up the point that Dickens wants a semantic field of religion. It makes sense in order to persuade his readers. That's how to use context. Now let's look at the skills I said I was going to teach you. You can see that she's begun to write about the author's intentions, this idea of persuading Christian readers and tapping into their Christian beliefs. She started to think about the big themes. In this case, it's Christianity. I've shown you how she's embedded quotations, and now she's hinting that she's going to give us more than one interpretation through that tentative language, seemingly. Lissy has also introduced the idea that these characters aren't real, but they are constructs there for a purpose. Let me show you that again. The purpose is to remind the reader that these are a typically morally good family. So they're there to illustrate what moral goodness is. We'll do the same with the next paragraph. Furthermore, by highlighting an insult towards Mrs. Cratchit as heresy, a crime against the church and by extension God, Dickens shows the closeness and joy of the Cratchit family. However, Marxist critics would argue that religion is a construct made for the purpose of keeping the working class in order, and by highlighting the Cratchit family as a religious one, Dickens is in fact showing their lack of control and the oppression by the upper class. However, as Dickens himself was Christian and was appealing to a predominantly Christian audience, it is more likely that he is instead showing the Cratchits in a positive light through the use of religious imagery. And hopefully you could sense my excitement at finding the word construct in the essay. Yes, examiners get truly excited about things. They share these things on Twitter and social media. They're overwhelmed with the excitement of it because they lead such exciting lives. And you are adding to that excitement by whapping that word in there. That's a top bit of advice. If you make sure you use this word, the examiner will desperately want to give you a top grade because you'll be proving you understand that these people aren't real, but they're there to illustrate the author's purpose. Now let's get into this yellow however and that yellow however. This is another word that Lissy realises will force the examiner to give higher marks. Why? Well, every time you use however, you then introduce another interpretation, don't you? And what does that mean? It means you're exploring, which is what the question asked you and is what is in the top of the mark scheme. Next, we have these words, Marxists and religious and Christian. I'll just highlight those because those are the big themes. So if we go back up to number 3, the big themes, There's going to be Christianity. Mr. Salles, why haven't you written Marxism down here? Well, because Marxism is a way of looking at social equality. So it is actually one of the big themes. Marxism itself is a way that you can get into alternative interpretations. That's why it appears here as a Marxist interpretation. You could also have a feminist interpretation. I find this a really useful one to teach to my students because it's relevant to every text they study from the 19th century and also the 20th century. And Marx is also a brilliant way of dealing with social inequality. He's fantastic to use with Dickens because they are experiencing poverty in London at the same time. So Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto came out only 5 years after A Christmas Carol. On to the next paragraph. It could be argued that Dickens shows the struggles of the poor through the use of tone in the presentation of the Cratchits. Dickens interweaves a joyful description with hints at poverty and loss to create an uncertain and somewhat melancholy tone. By commenting that nobody said or thought it was at all a small pudding for a large family, Dickens highlights how small the pudding actually is. Furthermore, the final, rather drawn-out sentence, "Bob held his withered little hand, dreaded that he might be taken from him," entirely changes the tone of the paragraph. The verb taken shows the lack of control that the Cratchits, and by extension the poor, have over their lives, and also foreshadows stay for, where Tiny Tim is taken from them. Right, let's see what I want you to pay attention to here. Let's begin with Dickens shows, Dickens interweaves, and Dickens highlights. By always introducing the author's name and then a verb showing what they're doing, Lissy knows that she's always explaining Dickens' purpose and his viewpoint, and therefore is always scoring higher marks. Then we have in yellow, tone and tone. This again is something that you can prepare in advance. You know what the writer's tone is. Effectively, that means the writer's point of view. So writing about the writer's tone always gets you into the top band of the mark scheme. And again, you can prepare that in advance because the writer doesn't change their tone depending on what the question is. Now we come to these massive quotations. This one here and this one here. They're huge. But Lissy is so good at embedding quotations that they fit into the sentence just as smoothly as the single word taken does down here. This is a top skill which allows her to get to that 507 words. It means that under time pressure she knows she's going to score massive marks. She has another technique which you may not have been taught, and it's this use of the ellipsis to cut out words in a quotation you don't need. That's a really easy skill because, this might be from the beginning of a paragraph and this might be from the end, and then you chop out the rest of the paragraph because you don't need it. Next, I want to tell you something about subject terminology because students always worry about it. You might think that calling the word taken a verb is a brilliant use of subject terminology. Well, it's correct, but it doesn't add anything to our understanding. If Lissy had just written the word taken shows the lack of control of the Cratchits, it would get exactly the same number of marks. It doesn't really matter that taken is a verb here. However, if we think about words like shows, interweaves, highlights, foreshadows, they are very relevant to her argument, and they are also subject terminology. So what I would encourage you to do is just write about what the author is doing, and those doing words, what the author is doing, will be your most effective subject terminology. Remember, the question will always ask you how the author does something, so those words about what the author does are always going to help you answer the question as well, and therefore guarantee you really good marks. So in this paragraph, I'm only going to concentrate on those words that show what Dickens is up to. Moreover, the drawn-out nature of the sentence emphasises Cratchit's love for his son, What's the word? It's emphasises. That's the one that shows what Dickens is up to, and could show how he's trying to make the most of the time they have together. This strong connection is emphasised further in stave 4. Oh, there it is again. Emphasised. I'm going to steal that as my subject terminology and get really good marks. Where the usually chaotic and noisy Cratchit household is described as quiet, very quiet. This juxtaposition shows the grief that the Cratchit feels. Oh look, what's Dickens doing again? He's using juxtaposition in order to show something. I'm going to steal that word. And by the way, juxtaposition happens in every single text that you read and is always about the structure of the text, and most students don't write about the structure. So that's another easy way of getting top grades. So it shows the grief that the Cratchits feel and highlights the struggles of the poor in Victorian England. Highlights again, that's the word that tells us what the author is doing. And notice how she keeps coming back to the topic that's in the question, the poor. Now, it would be a good discipline for you now to pause the screen and see how many of the 6 things I was teaching you can remember. 4 of them should apply to this. So can you find those 4 things? They are numbers 2 to 5 on my list. Have a go or not. Catch up with me in the video now. In this paragraph, we're going to look more closely at interpretations and context. Dickens shows the struggles of the Cratchits and by extension the poor to show the wrongs in belief, such as Malthusian theory. To do this, Scrooge embodies Malthusian ideas. Malthusian ideas state that the poor should not be helped, as otherwise, and Scrooge even directly quotes this, there will be a surplus population. By presenting and building up to the Cratchits' grief, Dickens evokes sympathy from the reader and shows the immoral views of Malthusian theory. Now, you don't need to know anything about Thomas Robert Malthus and Malthusian for your essay, unless you're studying this text. But my point is, she has prepared this in advance. She knows that there is this critical political viewpoint, these Malthusian ideas about the poor, and so she knows she's going to be able to fit that into every essay, even if the essay is about Scrooge, even if the essay is about the ghosts, because the ghosts are there to disprove his ideas. She knows it will be relevant whatever the question is, and the same will be true of your text. For example, every single text that you study at GCSE will be open to a feminist interpretation, because the role of women will be crucial in that text, even if they're crucial because they're exploited or ignored. And that means you will always be able to write about a patriarchal society. Hey, because they were always written under a patriarchal society. So you can 100% guarantee that the idea of the patriarchal society and a feminist perspective will be relevant whatever the exam question is. For example, with the Cratchit family, who does Dickens want us to have most sympathy with? Well, of course, it's the son, Tiny Tim, because boys are so much more important than girls in a patriarchal society. Let's now look at how Lissy concludes. To conclude, Dickens presents the Cratchits in a positive light and a negative tone to evoke sympathy from the reader and highlight the struggles of the poor in Victorian England. Well, this is a lovely, beautifully written conclusion, but it has the same problem as the thesis. It doesn't say why Dickens wants to highlight these struggles in Victorian England. And what Lissy really needs to do is convince us that Dickens wants his readers to change their viewpoint and perhaps also their behaviour. In other words, your conclusion needs to write about the why. Now, the easiest way to do that is to say, well, I'm always going to write about the end of the novel or my text in my conclusion, because at the end we always get a fuller understanding of what the author's why is, what their reason is for ending the story this way. So here is the ending of A Christmas Carol. Don't worry, we're not going to read it. I'm just going to zoom in on this small section to show you how you can write about the ending in your conclusion. Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all and infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. So now I can use this to show what Dickens wants his readers to think or feel. He wants them to do infinitely more than they're currently doing, so to give much more to charity, but also in their personal dealings with people who are less well off, to be much kinder and generous. He wants the readers to think like Scrooge does about Tiny Tim, who did not die. Here he's suggesting that giving to charity isn't just a token gesture, and even more importantly, isn't throwing your money away on poor people who are just going to use it to spend on alcohol and unsavoury habits. His point here is that you will genuinely save lives. And infant mortality was appalling in Dickens' time. You literally would save someone's life by giving them some money for their child. Next, Scrooge becomes a second father. Well, this is a metaphor for how he wants his readers, and in particular his male readers who control the finances, to behave towards people who need their support. If we thought of ourselves as related to people, we would take much better care of them. And then he extends this to the idea of becoming a good master. In this case, master means an employer. And what he's really telling his readers is, look, you employ people either as domestic servants or in your businesses. You have the opportunity to utterly transform their lives by being just a little bit kinder and a little bit more generous. Now, hopefully you could see this ending will be relevant to every single essay that could ever be asked, because all these things are about the author's point of view, which, as you know, will be relevant to every essay. These would have helped Lissy to explain the why, both in her thesis and her conclusion, when she would have scored 30 out of 30. If you would like to see more essays that show you how to score top marks, click on one of the videos appearing here or here. See you soon on my channel.